This is the sound of war. For almost 5 years, it was a never-ending sound in every part of the world. My name is Alexander Scourby, and these are the voices and sounds of World War II. Technically, World War II had an official beginning. This was on September 1st, 1939, when German panzer divisions moved across the Polish border. Many people believe, however, the war began 4 years earlier. It is October 3rd, 1935. The place, Northeast Africa. The situation, Italian armies based in Italian Eritrea move across the borders of one of the oldest Christian nations in the world, Ethiopia. Il Duce, Mussolini, has an old score to settle with the Ethiopians dating back to 1896. Then Italian troops were massacred at Adolph in an ill-fated attempt to conquer Ethiopia. Then it was men against men. Now it is men against steel. The Italians have the steel. The League of Nations acts quickly. They condemn the invasion and vote economic sanctions against Italy. It proves ineffective. In May 1936,
the Duce has told them that the war is over. And now they will go back to their homes, and they will realize that in 7 months, Italy has accomplished one of the greatest military feats known in history. You hear now the band in the square playing, and the people are still calling him, and the balcony is still lighted, and he will appear again. Yes, he has just appeared at this moment, standing on the balcony, this lonely figure of a man who has led 34 millions to this colossal victory in spite of sanctions, in spite of the hostility of the world.
The League of Nations, the great experiment, was finished. World collective security was now a memory. A new word has entered the international language: appeasement. It is March 1938. A heavily armed Germany has become one of the most powerful nations in the world. Under Chancellor Adolf Hitler, they mobilize. In the spring of 1938, they strike.
Die Rechtslosmachung dieser Menschen muss ein Ende nehmen. Ich habe dies schon eindeutig in meiner Rede vom 22.
That was Chancellor Adolf Hitler. He is speaking at Nuremberg. He attacks the League of Nations. He attacks France and Great Britain. He attacks all the democracies of the world. Now, 2 years after occupying the Rhineland, he looks to Austria. Chancellor von Schuschnigg of Austria visits the Führer at Berchtesgaden. The Führer says, "How have you dared all these years suppress and torture my people, my German people in Austria?" Schuschnigg listens. German armies are mobilized on the border. Hitler shows Schuschnigg the plan for the German attack. Schuschnigg speaks by radio to the Austrian people. When he finishes, he is weeping. He has told them that Austria is to become part of Germany. It is September 1938.
Sich eine kaum fassbare Verblendung hingeben. Ich habe in meiner Rede vom 22. Februar vor dem deutschen Reichstag...
Hitler is looking south to the democracy of Czechoslovakia. Of 14 million Czechs, 3.5 million are Germans. In the Sudetenland, there is an unhappy German-speaking minority. Hitler sees his opportunity. He speaks to the Reichstag. "We must save our German brothers in the Sudetenland," he says. In September 1938, Hitler is again ready to strike. He sets October 1st for Operation Green, the invasion of Czechoslovakia. Great Britain and France watch. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain flies to meet Hitler.
How horrible, fantastic, incredible it is that we should be digging trenches and trying on gas masks here because of a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing.
He agrees to the Führer's demands to turn over the Sudetenland to Germany. Hitler then makes more demands. The Czechs refuse. They will fight. Mussolini enters the bargaining. He calls for a four-power meeting to solve the problem. The Führerbau, Hitler's headquarters in Munich. Hitler does all the talking. Mussolini nods in agreement. Chamberlain and Daladier listen.
This is Max Gordon calling from Munich, Germany. It is now 8 minutes to 2 o'clock a.m. local time. Exactly 17 minutes ago, Premier Chamberlain of England, Premier Daladier of France, walked out of the assembly room at the Führer's palace here. Benito Mussolini, the Duce of Italy, followed them shortly afterwards to catch his special train for Italy. The Big Four Conference of Munich has come to a formal close.
Prime Minister Chamberlain returns to Great Britain.
After my visits to Germany, I realized vividly how Herr Hitler feels that he must champion other Germans. He told me privately, and last night he repeated publicly, that after this Sudeten German question is settled, that is the end of Germany's territorial claims in Europe.
The sacrifice for peace in our time. Czechoslovakia loses 1/3 of its land and population. Great Britain and Germany sign a treaty of friendship. Peace is now assured. Hitler makes more demands on the Czechs. Again, Great Britain and France watch. They do not move. It is March 1939. All of Czechoslovakia has now become a German protectorate. 2 weeks later, France and Great Britain make an aggressive move. They guarantee the independence of Poland. If Germany moves against Poland, France and Great Britain will fight.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a special news bulletin. Moscow, Germany and Russia today signed a non-aggression pact. They have agreed that neither country would declare war against one another and that neither one would come to the aid of a third party in case either nation was attacked.
Operation White is now sealed, the invasion of Poland. Hitler no longer need worry about a Russian attack from the east. Hitler and Stalin will now divide Poland. The Führer is sure that France and Great Britain will not fight. It is September 1st, 1939. At 5:45 a.m., German armies move across the Polish borders and converge upon the capital city of Warsaw from the north, south, and west. It is now 10 a.m., 4 hours and 15 minutes since the start of the attack. In Berlin, the Council of Ministers of the German Reichstag have been assembled. The reason? An emergency session. The Führer will speak. An ironical note. Hitler will ask the Reichstag ministers for their support in a war that is already underway.
Those assembled arise and stand to greet the arrival of the German Führer. The applause greets the Führer, who has just arrived in the Call Opera House to address the Reichstag, which has been called an extraordinary session. We are expecting that Prime Minister Goering, in a very few moments, will open formally the session in the Reichstag.
Hitler is speaking. This is the actual broadcast. The translation you will hear is taking place on September 1st, 1939. You will hear 2 interruptions of the Hitler speech, when news commentator Bob Trout takes the air for 2 important news flashes.
Danzig war und ist eine deutsche Stadt.
Danzig was and is a German city.
Alle diese Gebiete verdanken ihre kulturelle Erschließung ausschließlich dem deutschen Volk.
All these regions have only Germany to thank for their cultural development.
In all diesen östlichen Gebieten hieß die Barbarei herrschen.
Shortly after midday of August 31st, the day before the attack, Hitler signed the final order that would send the Nazi troops into Poland. Sometime during that day, Hitler also found time to send a telegram to the Duke of Windsor, Edward. It read, "You may rest assured that my attitude toward Britain and my desire to avoid another war between our peoples remain unchanged. It depends on Britain, however, whether my wishes for the future development of German-British relations can be realized." Signed, Adolf Hitler.
Wenn Polen versuchen sollte, auf dem Weg zollpolitischer Maßnahmen Danzig wirtschaftlich zu vernichten, dass dann Deutschland nicht mehr länger untätig zusehen könnte.
I told the Polish ambassador 3 weeks ago that if situation continued as it was, if Danzig were persecuted and it were attempted by Poland to ruin Danzig economically, the situation could not be tolerated.
We interrupt this broadcast of Adolf Hitler's speech just momentarily to report a dispatch from Paris which says that Premier Daladier of France has now called the French Council of Ministers for an emergency meeting which is to take place just 10 minutes from now at 5:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Meine Friedensliebe und meine endlose Langmut soll man nicht mit Schwäche oder gar mit Feigheit verwechseln.
No one should confuse my patience with cowardice. The first answer to the proposals which I made to Poland was Polish general mobilization, and the second was further terrible atrocities committed by the Poles on Germans.
Hitler said, "I am from now on the first soldier of the German Reich. I have once more put on the coat that was most sacred and dear to me. I will not take it off until victory is secured, or I will not survive the outcome."
Ich habe mich daher nun entschlossen, mit Polen in der gleichen Sprache zu reden, mit der Polen und seit
I therefore resolve to speak to Poland in the same language in which Poland has addressed us for such a long time.
Es war nur eine Frage.
Once again, we interrupt very briefly this talk by Chancellor Hitler to announce that in London, Parliament has been summoned to meet at 6 p.m. in London, which is 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time today.
Field Marshal Goering now takes over. The Reichstag ministers vow unbending loyalty to the Führer and the Nazi Party.
In dem uns von Polen aufgezwungenen Kampfe zur Abwehr unerträglicher Übergriffe und zur Wiedergutmachung des uns zugefügten...
We shall fight to the bitter end against the Poles.
Der Reichstag verspricht in seiner eigenen Geschlossenheit jederzeit das Vorbild der Nation zu sein.
The Reichstag promises to be the example of the nation. Sieg Heil to the Führer. The Reichstag is at present singing the German national anthem.
2 days later, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain speaks to the British Empire and the world.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
The German panzers moved quickly across Poland. The speed of their attack forced Russia to respond quickly. Russian troops moved across the eastern Polish borders on September 17th, and 10 days later, Warsaw fell. The next day, Poland was partitioned by Russia and Germany. In the United States, the former Polish president and world-acclaimed pianist Paderewski spoke.
I know that the world's present unrest will not last forever. I am perfectly convinced that some day will come when the turmoil of war will cease and peace will be restored. But when?
Russia invaded Finland on October 10th. But the Finns were of stout heart. The Russians were not prepared to fight a long winter campaign. In England, Winston Churchill spoke.
Only Finland, superb, nay, sublime. Sublime in the jaws of peril. Finland shows what free men can do. The service rendered by Finland to mankind is magnificent. They have exposed for all the world to see the military incapacity of the Red Army and of the Red Air Force. Many illusions about Soviet Russia have been dispelled in these few fierce weeks of fighting in the Arctic Circle. Everyone can see how communism rots the soul of a nation, how it makes it abject and hungry in peace, and proves it base and abominable in war.
On the Western Front, there was what historians call the phony war. There was no action. There was not a British casualty until 3 months and 9 days from the start of hostilities on September 1st. The French were complacently happy in their elaborate series of fortifications that hypnotized the whole world, the Maginot Line. Another ironical note. Years later, at the Nuremberg war crime trials, Field Marshal Keitel said, "If the French had attacked us during the Polish campaign, we would not have had a real defense." In Great Britain, children were evacuated to the United States and countries of the Commonwealth, and transatlantic phone calls at Christmas time brought a touch of home to a warring world.
Hello, Mom. Hello, darling. How are you? Fine, thanks. How are you? I hope you're having a Merry Christmas.
Listen, Violet.
Yes.
Come on now, don't be silly now.
Just a moment. Mrs. Dollop, just a moment. We'll have Violet for you in just a minute. Here's Ronnie. Here's Ronnie who wants to add a word, and then we'll come back to Violet.
Hi, Mom.
Hello, Sal. How are you?
I'm going to cry.
As Christmas 1939 neared, great news was building up by the British Empire. The place, Montevideo, Uruguay. In the harbor of the Rio de la Plata, 3 British cruisers with the majestic-sounding names Ajax, Achilles, and Exeter trapped the pride of the German Navy, the pocket battleship Graf Spee. It is Sunday, December 17th. The situation? The Graf Spee has been ordered out to sea by neutral Uruguay. It is 6 p.m. Slowly, the Graf Spee moves out into the harbor. Here is the actual flash of what then took place.
We interrupt our regular program to bring you a special broadcast. We take you now to Montevideo, Uruguay.
The Graf Spee has exploded 5 miles from the coast. The ship has been scuttled. We now return you to the way to York. Goodbye, ladies and gentlemen.
The Graf Spee has been scuttled. Now an eyewitness.
The ship is moving, rolling from side to side. There goes another explosion. The after turret has gone up. She's going down. She's going down by the stern. The stern is completely underwater. Flames are still shooting up into the air. Smoke.
Great Britain, for centuries mistress of the seas, had won the first great naval engagement of the war. The new year came, but still no action on the Western Front. In the north, the overwhelming superiority of Russian men and machines forced Finland to capitulate. Germany also looked north. The Norwegian iron that Germany was getting from neutral Sweden was endangered by the British blockade. On April 9th, the German machine moved again. Norway and Denmark fell quickly. On May 10th, the panzers hit the Low Countries. The Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, all swept aside by the avalanche of speed and armor. The day the Low Countries fell, Prime Minister Chamberlain spoke.
It was clear that at this critical moment in the war, what was needed was the formation of a government which would include members of the Labour and Liberal oppositions. His Majesty has now entrusted to my friend and colleague, Mr. Winston Churchill, the task of forming a new administration on a national basis.
Sir Winston Churchill took over as Prime Minister of Great Britain. 3 days later, the Dutch army surrendered, and the following day the French army broke at Sedan. Then more disaster. On March 28th, King Leopold of Belgium asked the Germans for surrender terms. 400,000 weary Belgian soldiers laid down their arms. But what about the French and British that had come to their aid just 2 weeks before? They were trapped. 340,000 French and British troops slogged back to the ports of Belgium. The port they reached first was a name that will live forever: Dunkirk. British poet laureate John Masefield called it the 9 Days' Wonder. Prime Minister Churchill called it a miracle of deliverance. Technically, it was called Operation Dynamo. Actually, 887 ships and boats of all kinds evacuated the more than 300,000 troops to the safety of British shores. They would fight again another day.
What General Weygand has called the Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
A few days later, Churchill again spoke to the House of Commons. Wars are not won by evacuations. It is June 10th, 1940. Mussolini speaks.
Mussolini began. Combatants on land, sea, and in the air. Black shirts of the Revolution and of the Legion. Men and women of Italy, of the Empire, and of the Kingdom of Albania. Listen, a declaration of war has been given to the ambassadors of France and England.
In the United States, President Roosevelt.
On this 10th day of June, 1940, the hand that held the dagger has struck it into the back of its neighbor.
Italy was now at war. 4 days later, the French capital, Paris, fell. The Russians from the east occupied Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. It is June 22nd, 1940. The surrender of France to Germany in the forest at Compiègne.
Hello, CBS. Hello, NBC. This is William C. Kirker now carrying on. Hitler himself was the first one to rise, and as soon as Adolf Hitler stood up to greet the French delegates by giving the Nazi salute, Herr von Ribbentrop and Rudolf Hess followed suit, while Field Marshal Goering and Grand Admiral von Raeder raised their baton, leaving General von Brauchitsch and von Keitel as the only ones to give the military salute. The French gentlemen themselves, in turn, greeted with the military salute, and all those present wore uniforms, except Monsieur Noël, who was attired in smart civilian clothes. He himself was quite a contrast to the glittering uniforms which surrounded him. However, undeterredly, he took his place, almost facing Herr Hitler, who was sitting at the opposite side of that long green table with his back towards the statue of General Foch.
The terms: the demobilization of the French fleet, the turning over of all anti-Nazi Germans residing in France, the condition that any Frenchman caught while fighting with another country against Germany would be shot, and finally, the most tragic term of all, that French prisoners would not be released until the conclusion of the peace. General Weygand, who agreed to this term, believed the British were just a few short weeks from complete defeat. History, however, records that General Weygand condemned 1.5 million French prisoners to Nazi prison camps for 5 years.
Well, it was 21 years and 8 months ago that Compiègne was the scene of the signing of an armistice. And today, we are right here on the very same spot. It is the same car which was used that time, the same table, the same chairs. Only this time, everything is reversed. Where Marshal Foch sat that time, now Hitler sat. Where the German delegates had their place, now the French plenipotentiaries are seated. Everything is reversed. Then it was Germany who was asking for an armistice, and now it is France.
From London, General Charles de Gaulle said, "France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war." It is the summer of 1940. The Battle of Britain has begun. July, August, September. 3 months that turned the tide of war. The Prime Minister of Great Britain would salute the gallant heroes of the island.
In July, August, and September, 40 or 50 squadrons of British fighter aircraft in the Battle of Britain broke the teeth of the German air fleet at odds of 7 or 8 to 1. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
It was in June that the Prime Minister said, while England was awaiting the German invasion, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets." Then, putting his hand over the microphone, he said with a smile, "And we will hit them over the heads with beer bottles, which is all we have really got." It is September 16th, 1940. The place, Washington, D.C. The situation, the picking of the first numbers for the drafting of American youth into the armed forces. In the audience, there are many women. One of them is a mother who knows the draft number of her son. Listen closely. President Roosevelt speaks.
Secretary of War will now draw the first number. The first number drawn by the Secretary of War is serial number 158.
A mother's cry, the first of many that would invade the American home during the next 5 years. November comes. The election. President Roosevelt wins his 3rd term. 22 million votes for Wendell Willkie, 27 million for the president. 38 states in the Electoral College for the president, 10 for Willkie. It is December 26, 1940.
Never before, since Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, has our American civilization been in such danger as now. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself.
The war in Europe goes on. A British princess, later to become queen, speaks to the children of the Commonwealth.
I can truthfully say to you all that we children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers, and airmen. And when peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
In the United States, the president tells the world of the American ideology.
In the future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear anywhere in the world.
These were the words that gave new hope to the oppressed countries of the world. The words moved further. They became action. It is January 10th, 1941. Introduced into the House of Representatives is a bill technically and ironically called H.R. 1776. The British Empire will know it as the Lend-Lease Bill. The bill calls for the United States to sell, lease, transfer, or exchange war material to any government whose defense is vital to the defense of the United States. There are many opponents. Great heroes rise up against it. Charles A. Lindbergh.
These wars in Europe are not wars in which our civilization is defending itself against some Asiatic intruder. There is no Genghis Khan or Xerxes marching against our Western nations. This is simply one more of those age-old struggles within our own family of nations. If we enter fighting for democracy abroad, we may end by losing it at home.
Rushing to the president's aid, his former opponent, Wendell Willkie.
Providing the aid we give to Britain is effective, it offers the best, the very best clear chance for us to keep out of war. Hitler, in my judgment, will make war on us or on our friends and allies in this hemisphere when, as, and if he chooses.
On March 8, 1941, the Senate passed the Lend-Lease Bill, and 3 days later, H.R. 1776 was passed by the House of Representatives. President Roosevelt signed the bill into law the same day. April came, and the Germans invaded Greece and Yugoslavia. A few days later, Russia and Japan signed a neutrality pact. It is June 22nd, 1941.
At 4 o'clock this morning, Hitler attacked and invaded Russia. So now this must launch his mechanized armies, slaughter, pillage.
August 12, 1941, Clement Attlee, leader of His Majesty's opposition party, speaks to the House of Commons.
I have come to tell you about an important meeting between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister, which has taken place, and of a declaration of principle which has been agreed between them.
This is the meeting that history would call the signing of the Atlantic Charter. It stated the aims of the United States and Great Britain. After the release of the Atlantic Charter, Prime Minister Churchill said, "This is an astonishing document. A neutral power, the United States, joining with an active belligerent in open declaration against Nazi tyranny." Churchill then speaks to the conquered nations of Europe.
Yield not an inch. Keep your souls clean from all contact with the Nazi. Make them feel, even in their fleeting hour of brutish triumph, that they are the moral outcasts of mankind. Help is coming. Mighty forces are arming in your behalf. Have faith, have hope. Deliverance is sure.
It is the summer of 1941. The Germans are still on the move in Russia. In the middle of September, they occupy the great city of Kiev. A few weeks later, Adolf Hitler makes an announcement. Today begins the last great decisive battle of the war. The international situation is precarious. Europe is at war, and there are rumblings in the Far East. It was in July of 1940 that President Roosevelt signed an order freezing all of Japan's United States assets. Japan, a quick history of aggression in Manchuria, Mongolia, India, Asia Minor, and Central Asia. In July of 1937, the attack against China began. The war was vicious in its brutality, but Japan could not conquer China. One Chinese general said, "We can win even if we lose 100 million people. We will still have 300 million left." The atmosphere was tense and electric. From the House of Commons, on November 10th, 1941, came a promise.
I take this occasion to say, and it is my duty to say, that should the United States become involved in war with Japan, the British declaration will follow within the hour.
4 days later, Tojo's special envoy, Saburo Kurusu, arrives in the United States. He is to assist Japanese Ambassador Nomura in peace negotiations.
You all know how difficult my mission is, but I'll do all I can to make it a successful one for the sake of two countries, Japan and the United States.
You will now hear one of the most ironical broadcasts in history. It is Sunday afternoon, December 7th, in New York. The time is 1:15 p.m. A spokesman for the Foreign Policy Association is on the air on the National Broadcasting Company. In Hawaii, dawn has just broken. In the skies over Hawaii, Japanese bombardiers just now spotted major elements of the United States Pacific Fleet at their berths in Pearl Harbor.
acting on reports that 125,000 assembled in Indochina, President Roosevelt made a personal appeal to the Japanese emperor. On Tuesday, President Roosevelt had asked Tokyo for a quick explanation of the aim of these Japanese troop movements into Indochina.
A brief recapitulation of the dramatic events. On November 17th, the Japanese envoys began negotiations with Secretary of State Cordell Hull. Their demands for peace in the world: end the United States embargo against Japan, the United States should stop sending military and economic aid to China, the recognition of Manchukuo, and full Japanese access to the Dutch East Indies. 8 days later, Cordell Hull gave the United States answer. In effect, Washington had not only completely rejected the Japanese demands, but in turn had demanded a complete turnabout of Japanese policy.
The second unanswered communication was one which Secretary Hull placed in the hands of Nomura and Kurusu on November 26th. It explained the conditions under which the United States might be willing to negotiate settlement of the conflict in the Far East.
The United States reply was delivered to the Japanese envoys on November 25th. At that moment, at Takan Bay in the Kuril Islands of Japan's home waters, Vice Admiral Chiwichi Magumo gave the orders to weigh anchor. Under complete radio silence, 72 warships, including 6 aircraft carriers, made ready to take to the open sea. Their destination, southeast, the Hawaiian Islands.
The Japanese government still has not answered Secretary Hull's statement of November 26th. Short of acceptance of Secretary Hull's conditions, Japan's practical alternatives today appear to be precipitation of unlimited war in the Pacific or inactive waiting, accompanied by gradual economic strangulation.
It is December 5th. The Japanese task force is 1,000 miles from Pearl Harbor. Now the task force commander receives the fateful message, climb Mount Nataka. Translation, attack, 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 as previously planned. We're back again to the broadcast of Sunday, December 7th. It is 1:22 p.m. New York time. The bomb bay doors are open for the Japanese bombardiers over Hawaii. Below, 70 combat ships of the United States Pacific Fleet.
Particular defense measures adopted in the Far East this week by the United States and friendly countries acquire their significance. American Marines have sailed from Shanghai, where large-scale hostilities were canceled at Corregidor, the fortress of Manila, and naval bases lie under permanent blackout. Nothing in the language or the behavior of the Japanese government. Practical preparations are being made to accept separate bases for a settlement.
It is 1:25. The first bombs have just fallen. In the middle of Pearl Harbor, lined up majestically in the sunlight, the battleships Arizona, Nevada, Maryland, Tennessee, California, Oklahoma, and West Virginia.
A segment of congressional temper was evident in Representative May's statement that the United States was ready to blast the Japanese off the land and blow them off the water, and in Senator Connolly's remark that if Japan wants war, and if we must have a fight, Japan will find out that we have a Navy in the Pacific that can shoot straight.
It is 2:28 Eastern Standard Time.
It has been the pleasure of the National Broadcasting Company to bring you Sammy Kaye's Sunday Serenade, featuring his world-famed swing and sway music. The poem read by Sammy Kaye was When We're Apart by Wilson Darren. Today's broadcast has come to you from our studios in Radio City, New York.
From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked the Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii from the air. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York.
Bulletin after bulletin comes over the air.
The White House also reported today an simultaneous air attack on Army and Navy bases in Manila. This report followed the President's declaration that all Army and Navy bases on the island of Oahu in Hawaii are now under air attack.
Here is what has happened. President Roosevelt
phoned secretarially half an hour ago that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, the United States naval base on Oahu Island in the Hawaiian Islands. This means that war is underway between Japan and the United States.
Henry L. Stimson today ordered the entire Army into uniform, effective tomorrow. His order applied to every one of the Army's 1,600,000, including the thousands of officers and men on duty in administrative posts in the War Department building who heretofore have been permitted to wear civilian clothes.
An eyewitness account of the bombing at Manila.
Hello, NBC. This is Bert Simon speaking from Manila, and this time I've got a real scoop for you. Manila has just been bombed. In fact, right now it is being bombed. And without warning, Japanese bombers started bombing Fort William McKinley, Nichols Airfield, and the RCA transmitting station. At 9 minutes past 3 o'clock, without warning. Right now, the moon is shining absolutely full. It's paint. Stand out like mirrors. And there's no wonder that an enemy bomber could pick out any spot around this part of Manila tonight. It isn't the fault of the blackout. There isn't a light shining any place. But old man Moon just wouldn't stay blacked out.
The next day, President Roosevelt spoke to a joint session of Congress.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
He concludes,
with confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
As President Roosevelt asked Congress for a declaration of war, Prime Minister Winston Churchill was doing the same in his speech to Parliament. These were mere formalities. On December 10th, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, and the United States Congress quickly made a war declaration against the Axis powers. The new year came, and there was much defeat before victory.
The Navy announces that Wake Island is probably captured by the enemy, and now it is disclosed that fewer than 400 Marines held Wake Island for at least 14 days against heavy Japanese attacks. The Marines had a small quantity of weapons. They were commanded by a 38-year-old Marine Major, James P.S. Devereux. They sank one Japanese light cruiser and 3 destroyers. They held out against 13 raids.
On April 9th, 1942, came the most tragic day in United States military history. You will now hear one of the most dramatic broadcasts ever made. General Jonathan Wainwright, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Forces on Bataan in the Philippines, speaks.
This is Lieutenant General Wainwright. Subject, surrender. It became apparent that the garrisons of these forces would be eventually destroyed by aerial and artillery bombardment and by infantry supported by tanks which have overwhelmed Corregidor. After leaving General Homer with no agreement between us, I decided to accept, in the name of humanity, his proposal. You will therefore be guided accordingly, and will, repeat, will, surrender all troops under your command to the proper Japanese officers. This decision on my part, you will realize, was forced upon me by means entirely beyond my control.
On April 10th, 1942, there began a series of marches that history would call death. The American and Filipino prisoners were the victims of almost unbelievable atrocities. The March of Death. There were some survivors.
We started the death march in groups of 100, about 3,000 or 4,000 of us in the line, marching by fours. About 3 Jap guards to 100 of us. Didn't see any officers, mostly those superior privates of theirs, men with 2 or 3 stars in their uniforms. They'd slap our soldiers across the face, beat them up. I saw one of our men carrying a new pair of shoes. He sat down to take off his old shoes. The Japs came up and took away both pairs. That lieutenant walked 7 days in the death march, and when we arrived at the end of the journey, he didn't have feet, just a mass of infected blisters. I saw a Jap truck pass and watched a Jap poke his rifle butt out and knock one of our officers into the ditch. I saw a tank deviate its course to hit a Martian American prisoner and literally crushed him into that road of death. Nothing to eat all day, nothing to drink. Some of the men drank from water buffalo wallows. They were so thirsty. I thought what most of us thought. Why in hell did I surrender? We thought it would be a blessing if we were shot. I saw an enlisted man go insane from the sun and malaria. The last I saw, the Japs were hitting him with those rifle butts. A well-trained pig wouldn't stand it. I saw dead Americans and Filipinos in the ditches at the side of the road, far behind the lines. They had been killed after the surrender. Our doctors, half dead themselves, tried to take care of the dying. The only way you could tell a live American from a dead one was to see whether his heart was beating.
On April 18th, 1942, Tokyo was bombed for the first time by carrier-based planes under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle. In May, a sea victory for the Americans in the Battle of the Coral Sea. A sea victory, a misnomer. It was the first time in naval history that not a single shot was exchanged by the opposing ships. 7 major Japanese surface vessels went down. 3 major ship losses for the United States. Air power accounted for all the destruction. How were the Japanese as fighters? Admiral Bull Halsey.
They're just as afraid to die as all men. When we land shells among them, we have often been near enough to hear them screaming in fright. 1 American is equal to 10 of them. In close fighting, jungle fighting, any kind of fighting we get out there, there is no question who is a better man. The Japs are losing 10 men to all 1. And believe me, rooting these Japs out once they get set is like digging out rats. The only way to get the Japs out of one of these pillboxes is to root them out and exterminate them.
Summer came and went. From Egypt would come the greatest success of all. The name, El Alamein. The man, General Montgomery. His words, give me a fortnight and I can resist the German attack. Give me 3 weeks and I can defeat the Boche. Give me a month and I can chase him out of Africa. It is November 10th, 1942.
General Alexander, with his brilliant comrade and lieutenant, General Montgomery, had gained a glorious and decisive victory in what I think should be called the Battle of Egypt. Rommel's army has been defeated.
Now, to Montgomery.
I feel I would like to speak to all who have served and fought with me during the last few years. What I have to say is very simple and quite short. I would ask you all to remember those of our comrades who fell in the struggle. They gave their lives that others might have freedom, and no man can do more than that. I believe that he would say to each one of them, well done, thou good and faithful servant.
Field Marshal Montgomery. His words before entering into combat with the enemy, I'm not a bit anxious about my battles. If I am anxious, I don't fight them. I wait until I am ready. Again, the new year. It is January 1943.
The Bob Hope Show will follow in a moment. It's 10 o'clock. And here is the news you've been waiting for. Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill have met on the soil of Africa at Casablanca. There, not far from the noise of war, they drew up battle plans for 1943. Plans designed to bring about the unconditional surrender of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Joseph Stalin was invited to the conference. He was unable to attend, even though Churchill and Roosevelt offered to move the meeting place much farther east. As the actual military leader of Russia, Stalin had to stay in Moscow to direct the present great offensive.
The blueprint for victory had been conceived. Now the execution. January 23rd, the 8th Army enters Tripoli. February 2nd, the German forces surrender at Stalingrad. May 12th, Axis resistance in Tunisia ends. 2 days later, Prime Minister Winston Churchill speaks.
Mr. President, the African war is over. One continent, at least, has been cleansed and purged forever from fascist or Nazi tyranny. The proud German army has by its sudden collapse, its sudden crumpling and breaking up, unexpected to all of us, the proud German army has once again proved the truth of the saying, the Hun is always either at your throat or your feet.
July 9th, the Allies invade Sicily. July 25th, Mussolini gives up control of the Italian government. September 3rd, the Allies invade southern Italy. 5 days later,
this is General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied force. The Italian government has surrendered its armed forces unconditionally.
It is November 21st, 1943. The success of Allied operations in the Southwest and North Pacific has now made it possible to strike at Japan's outer perimeter. The first objective, the Gilbert Islands, in particular, Macon and Tarawa. Macon fell easily, but Tarawa would hold a place in American history as one of the bloodiest battles ever fought. Bloody Tarawa. Tragic Tarawa. Terrible Tarawa. More than 1,000 Americans died in the heavy fighting. But now a springboard to the Marshall Islands was secure. The new year comes. It is February 1944. The situation, the attack on the Marshall Islands, in particular Kwajalein. The first piece of Japanese land attacked by the Allies that was in enemy hands before Pearl Harbor. Here is an on-the-spot description of the fighting at Kwajalein.
Just landed here about 15 minutes ago, and I don't know whether I sound scared or not, but I am. I don't know if you can hear any rifles popping or not, but there's rifles and just everything in the bush is going off around this place. Namur Island, down in the Kwajalein, and boy, this is really a hot place. And these guys just keep coming over here, boy, and they come awfully close, awfully close. The Marines have landed. The situation is not in hand yet. However, we have hope.
Now the Marines have started their forward wave now. There they go. They're going forward. That's a continual wave. They're going into a lot of fire, but they're going in. They're not stopping for anything. Who?
A chicken?
Where?
Well, I'll be doggone. This island, you wouldn't believe that a thing could be living on it, and here is a chicken. Just came over the hill, right down in our shell hole, very nonchalantly pecking and scratching around in the sand. Not singed a bit, or I don't know how that ever happened. That is good, isn't it, huh? That's very good. And of course, all the troops who were feeling very, very cautiously forward are all getting a big laugh out of it now. I mean, they're all pointing at it and getting a big bang out of it, all the men. It seems to me I read about something like that happening at another battle not long ago, where the men were under stress, and wasn't there Tarawa? I think it was. There was a Tarawa where the men were almost at the breaking point. I mean, the Jets had them in a terrible crossfire, and they were on a pier, and then a chicken walked out and right across the line of fire, and everybody laughed and broke the spell. Yeah. And so I think maybe someone puts these chickens up here. Maybe that's the USO or something of the sort. Because a good laugh now and then helps a lot, and especially here where everybody is under a strain more or less.
While the fighting for Kwajalein was going on, the squeeze in Italy was taking place. As the year opened, the Allies landed troops in Anzio. and the Anzio beachhead became one of the glorious spots in the history of the war. For 4 months, the Germans attacked the beachhead. The Americans could not break out. The Germans could not drive them into the sea. Said one American artillery officer, "We've got the Germans exactly where they want us." It is May 23rd, and the tide now turns. The Allied forces break out of their small perimeter and move inland. It is June 4th, 1944.
Allied troops have entered the eternal city of Rome. Sporadic resistance by the Germans continues. The Fifth Army has battled every inch of the way and entered the Italian capital after an artillery duel 6 miles from the city. Details just in disclose that the spearheads of Allied forces entering Rome were formed of American troops. The city was entered by the way of the Via Casalina, a famous highway into an historic city, the first European capital to be reached by Allied forces.
Now events move quickly. June 5th, 9 a.m. There are rumors throughout the free world. June 5th, 3 p.m. A coded message goes to the French underground. The message, "The arrow pierces steel." The meaning, the invasion of Fortress Europe is at hand. It is Tuesday, June 6th, 3:32 a.m.
A bulletin, London. A naval officer just returned to Supreme Allied headquarters from the French invasion beaches reports that all main points have been gained and that reinforcements are pouring across the channel in an unprecedented stream.
It is 10 a.m., Tuesday, June 6th. D-Day has come. The French invasion beaches are still not secure. It is less than 7 hours since the first men touched French soil. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt speaks to the world.
Last night, when I spoke with you about the fall of Rome, I knew at that moment that troops of the United States and our allies were crossing the Channel in another and greater operation.
Under a protecting umbrella of Allied aircraft, the Americans and British dug in on the 5 invasion beaches. The invasion beaches, called by the simple-sounding names, the British securing the east flank, protecting Gold Beach, Juno Beach, and Sword Beach. The Americans to hold the west flank, protecting Omaha and Utah beaches. And President Roosevelt asked the nation if he could lead them in prayer.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. They will need thy blessings. Their road will be long and hard. With thy blessing, we shall prevail over the unholy forces of our enemy. Help us to conquer the apostles of greed and racial arrogances. Lead us to the saving of our country, and with our sister nations into a world unity that will spell a sure peace. Thy will be done, Almighty God.
D+1, 36,000 men ashore on Utah Beach, 34,000 on Omaha, 83,000 on the British beaches of Gold, Juno, and Sword. Off the 5 landing beaches of Normandy were 5,300 ships of every size and shape. There was terrible war at sea as well as on land.
Well, the sea has gone down this afternoon of June 7th and is now running very quietly with the path of the moon across it. Stretched all around us in the darkness are the shapes of the ships of the convoys. The ack fire is going up from warships out to sea from us in the next lane, and we could hear the harsh motor noise of the German plane or planes overhead. Streaks of tracers are now shooting up and flashing on the sea all over our heads. when they're coming. Now it dies down for a moment as the plane seems to have passed beyond us and the tracers disappear. Here comes more German planes back again, and the tracers are rising up on all sides now. Now the motor dies away, or the motors. The fire keeps changing the Nazi plane as it goes down over the convoy. Just a minute ago, at the end of the other wave that came over, we shot down one of our own barrage balloons. Fell down into the sea. No particular harm done. There's the siren signal. The GQ General Quarters is over. The balloons come out.
It is still D+1 off the Normandy shore. One of the most fantastic broadcasts in history, the actual description of a German plane being shot down over the invasion convoy.
Here we go again. Another plane's come over. Right over our port side. Tracers are making an arc right over our bow now. They're disappearing into the clouds before they burst. Looks like we're going to have a night tonight. Give it to her, boys! Something burning is falling down through the sky. And circling down. Maybe a hit plane. There he goes. They got one. They got one. We got that one. This gun right here. Did we? Yeah. This one? Great blotch of fire came down and is smoldering now just off our port side in the sea. The lights of that burning Nazi plane are just twinkling now in the sea and going out. When the tracer starts up again and there's warning of another plane coming in.
It is still D+1. The first stories of the opening minutes on the 5 invasion beaches are now being told. How did the men react when they hit the beaches? A sailor on a landing barge tells his story.
Well, it seemed to me that they just didn't seem to worry about it. They went ashore, slowly, walked around, took their jobs, just as if they were on 42nd Street, just like I go out down sometimes to go window shopping.
What about the wounded?
Well, I never heard them up. I didn't understand. They don't cry, they don't moan about pain, or they don't ask for any help. They just sit there, try to hang on to their jaw or whatever part of them is wounded, and they don't say anything.
D+5. 80 miles of beachhead now held by the Americans and the British. D+11. More than 500,000 Allied soldiers have gained the shores of the French invasion coast. D+20. 1 million men now on Hitler's fortress, Europe. On July 20th, Adolf Hitler was wounded when a bomb exploded in a plot against his life. Said Hitler, "The German people are unworthy of my greatness. No one appreciates what I have done." 12 days later, Prime Minister Churchill calmly said, "I no longer feel bound to deny that victory may come, perhaps soon."
We're speaking to you from the hold of a Navy transport several miles off Guam in the Western Pacific.
What you're about to hear is not a radio drama. This is not a recreation. You are listening to a broadcast that took place on the eve of battle. It is July 19th, 1944. The place, off the island of Guam, the first United States possession to fall to the Japanese on December 10th, 1941. Guam, 1,155 miles south of Tokyo. American forces are now at the approaches to Japan's inner perimeter, the defenses and front of the home islands.
Tomorrow morning at dawn, American Marines will debark from this ship and move ashore to take back that island from the Japanese, who seized it from us 2.5 years ago. Tonight, on the eve of this new invasion, we've taken you into the living quarters of some of the Marines who will storm the Guam beaches tomorrow. They are gathered around us, one playing San Antonio Rose on the harmonica, just as on occasion, during this sea voyage, he has played for the other fellows. Down here in the lights of the hold are the men who are going to do the fighting. Are you married?
No.
Got a girl back there?
You?
A few.
A few?
Have you been in combat before?
Yeah, I have one.
Nothing serious, though, huh?
No.
Nothing like tomorrow.
Get Purple Heart?
Did you get the Purple Heart? Somebody wants to know?
No, not quite.
Well, let's hope you don't this time.
I hope so.
What kind of work do you do in the Marines? What will you be doing tomorrow?
Military safety.
It's a military secret, somebody says. Is that right?
Well, it's covered with it.
All right. Incidentally, we cannot give you the names of these men because of military security at this time. But maybe somebody back home will recognize a voice.
The men will soon storm ashore. Each hour is but 4 hours away. What are the men talking about on the eve of the invasion?
You've been taking care of laundry on here.
Right-ho.
Are your prices pretty low, do you think?
Well, I think they're reasonable, but some people don't, I don't guess. But I think they're lucky to even get their clothes washed.
Well, now, I gave you some of my clothes, and they came back starched. That's the first...
and iron.
That's the first time I've had any starched clothes overseas.
Well, you know, it's this little political pull there, you know.
The invasion of Guam has begun. One of the Marines moving in on a half-track has a wire recorder attached to his back. This broadcast is taking place a half-mile from the landing beach. Japanese fire is hitting all around the attacking Marines.
Well, it's up to my knees. I think my pistol got wet. I don't know. It's pretty high. I'm moving away from the half-track now. The men are motioning to each other to move forward. The surface of the coral is quite level, although it's bumpy, but it's not, at least not jagged, not full of foam. There's a lot of something growing underneath. The half-track's moving very slowly. It's about a half a mile to the beach. The men are all spread out. They look pretty good. It's a slow picture of these Marines. Boys, you know, from your own hometown, there's a lot of fire around us.
The Marines are ashore on Guam. We are now in a tank. The tank is moving forward against Japanese snipers and Japanese pillboxes, clearing the way for the Marines on foot. This is the actual conversation between tanks moving against the enemy.
Turn your turret on, will you? Right back here. Mimic your turret.
The tank has spotted a Japanese mortar behind a tree. Listen now to the terrible sounds of war and death. Higher. No, lower. Give him a burst of machine gun fire. There, you got him. He's still wiggling.
Got a mortar right behind that tree, right behind it. Oh, no. Move farther, move. See where that green thing is right there? Fire a burst of machine gun. Go high, low, right there. There, you got it. That's it, you got him. Another one right in there. A little lower, that's it. Put it right through the tree, a little lower. Still wiggling.
It is August 25th, 1944. 2 months, 19 days since the Allies landed on French soil. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days since the Nazi army marched into undefended Paris.
This is John McVeigh in Paris. Those bells you can hear are the bells of Notre Dame Cathedral. They've just begun ringing about 2 or 3 minutes ago, and they're ringing a chime of thanksgiving that French troops have entered the city. We just came in this morning with the first correspondence and the first American car to come in with these French troops, and we've just had a big street fight here right in the square in front of the cathedral. And now all the church bells in the city are beginning. I can hear 3 or 4 more churches, and I'll let you hear them. We've just had a big fight here in the square in front of Notre Dame, and we're all lying on our stomachs and hoping for the best, but we hope that's all over now, and that these bells that we hear are a sign that the last German resistance in Paris is cleaned up. You can hear the crowd laugh here. Vous êtes content que nous sommes venus? Fine, now I see a very pretty nurse here. Vous êtes content aussi?
Oh oui, très content. Bonjour.
She's very happy. Hello. And he says, we hope that the Germans will be
another dramatic broadcast. It is the following day. General Charles de Gaulle, symbol of all that was great in France since their defeat 4 years before, walks stiffly along the boulevards of Paris. Says de Gaulle, "I go on foot. This is not a day for passing in review with trumpets sounding." He is about to enter the Cathedral of Notre Dame.
The generals now turn to face the square in this huge crowd of Parisians.
There is firing going on in the street. You are hearing the actual shots in the assassination attempt against the life of General Charles de Gaulle.
Is being presented to people. It's being received. It's being received. Even while the general is marching into the cathedral.
At this point, the news commentator, in dashing for safety, unplugged the wires of his recorder. Now he is back on the air.
Well, that was one of the most dramatic scenes I've ever seen. Just as General de Gaulle was about to enter the Cathedral of Notre Dame, firing started all over the place. I'm afraid we couldn't get you the noise of that firing because I was overwhelmed by a rush of people who were trying to seek shelter, and my cable parted from my microphone. But I fell just near General de Gaulle, and I managed to pick myself up. General de Gaulle was trying to control the crowds rushing into the cathedral. He walked straight ahead into what appeared to me to be a hail of fire, but he went straight ahead without hesitation, his shoulders flung back, and walked right down the central aisle, even while the bullets were pouring around him.
It is December 1944. At Adolf Hitler's Eagle's Nest headquarters in Bavaria, plans for the last great battle of the war are underway. Attack in full force at the Ardennes, the favorite German hunting ground of 2 wars. On December 16th, General von Rundstedt gives the order of the day. "Soldiers of the West Front, your hour has struck. Everything is at stake." The Germans strike in full force. Through fog, snow, and freezing temperature, they move forward, 12 miles on the first day. The Germans move on. The offensive is gaining momentum. At the little Belgian town of Bastogne, the Allies hold. They must hold until the weather clears. The Germans call for the commander of Bastogne to surrender. General Anthony McAuliffe replies with one word: nuts. The weather clears. 5,000 Allied planes take up the attack. The Germans are now beaten. 2 weeks later, the Russians were on the move. The Germans took their armies from the Western Front and moved them to the east. And Winston Churchill said, "The Battle of the Bulge was the greatest American battle of the war." It is January 31st, 1945. 3 weeks before, General Douglas MacArthur's forces had landed on Luzon in the Philippines.
Americans dominate all roads, railways on Luzon Plain. Some observers believe that the Philippine capital may soon be in our hands. Enemy forces are cut off.
This is Pat Flaherty speaking from a mobile transmitter in central Luzon in the Philippines. For the past 3 days, I have been in contact and visiting with a large number of the liberated American prisoners of war. There's only one way to express it. For the past 3 years, these men have been through hell, but they took the worst the Japs had to offer and came up smiling and wisecracking. As Corporal Cecil H. Hay of San Antonio, Texas put it, we're in the tall cotton now.
We are now in Manila.
It might be appropriate to mention that many of the men who left Corregidor with General MacArthur are present here today.
The Commander-in-Chief, Allied Forces, Southwest Pacific Area, General Douglas MacArthur.
More than 3 years have elapsed. Years of bitterness, struggle, and sacrifice. Since I withdrew our forces and installations from this beautiful city, I now solemnly declare, Mr. President, the full powers and responsibilities under the Constitution restored to the Commonwealth, whose seat is here reestablished
as provided by law. Your country is again at liberty to pursue its destiny to an honored position in the family of free nations.
On February 19th, 1945, the United States Marines landed on Iwo Jima. The island is 8 miles square with no vegetation. Its landing beaches are covered with volcanic ash, rocks, and boulders. The island is ugly and treacherous. It is also only 750 miles from Tokyo. Marine Commander General Holland Smith said that during the battle, the fighting was the toughest the Marines have run across in 168 years. On February 23, 1945, a Marine patrol pushed to the topmost ridge of Mount Suribachi, the key to the southern end of the island. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal was there to snap the flag-raising ceremony that turned out to be the most dramatic and prized photograph of the war. Equally fantastic was the coincidence that saw Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal able to give an eyewitness account of the dramatic scene. He, too, was there at ugly Iwo Jima.
Up the precipitous side of a 600-foot extinct volcano, so precipitous that it seemed almost vertical, went a platoon of American Marines. Even through a glass, they seemed tiny figures, scrambling skyward against a background of blue. And then a few minutes later, from the thousands of throats upon ships and on land and sea, came the sudden cry, "There goes the flag." That was how the Stars and Stripes went up on the first island of Japan's outer rim of island defenses. We saw that flag going up halfway on the journey to shore with Lieutenant General Holland Smith of the United States Marines. It was the high point in a week of hard fighting, fighting which continues and will continue for some days to come.
From Europe, too, the news was also highlighted by success after success.
This is James Cassidy with the American forces in France. Today, American forces in strength are within actual sight of Germany. Some of them in patrols have already crossed into Germany itself. I learned that the American patrols had gone over the border when I went up to the front lines of the Third Army late last night. Because of heavy enemy resistance between Metz and Nancy, I was unable to proceed further. But early today, with advanced units of the Third Army, I was able to look across into Germany itself, a vivid demonstration of how far this tremendous army has gone and how fast it has traveled.
The Americans and British were moving steadily from the west, the Russians from the east. Who would get to Berlin first? For the Americans and British, the most formidable barrier would be the Rhine River, the gateway to the heart of the German homeland. The Rhine River, treacherous and angry. No invader had ever crossed the river in war since Napoleon in 1805. The Rhine River, its east bank defended by high mountains from where the Germans could look down on the oncoming Allies. The Rhine River, its many bridges blown up by the retreating Germans. The assault must be made by water. An incredible happening. It is March 7th, 1945. Between the German cities of Bonn and Koblenz lies the town of Remagen. At Remagen is the Ludendorff Bridge connecting the west and east banks of the Rhine. At 3:30 p.m., March 7th, the Germans sent off a preliminary charge to destroy the bridge. The explosion was weak. The bridge remained intact. 20 minutes later, Sergeant Alexander Drabick and his platoon, members of the 1st American Army, reached the Ludendorff Bridge. They were amazed to see it still standing. Then they moved across. Miraculously, the explosives designed to blow up the bridge did not work. In 10 minutes, 100 First Army troops were across. At the end of 24 hours, 8,000 troops were poised on the eastern bank. Sergeant Alexander Drabick, the first man across.
They told me later that the bridge was only 250 yards across. It seemed like 250 miles. There were 2 other platoons ahead of us, but they'd got pinned down part of the way across the bridge, and then they sent us out.
How did Sergeant Drabick know he was the first man across?
Well, That was pretty simple. There wasn't anybody in front of me.
The Rhine was crossed. The First United States Army was again on the move. They had a rendezvous now at the Elbe River. Coming from the east was the first Russian-Ukrainian army. The newspapers headlined the coming meeting. Berlin was doomed. Nothing short of earth-shattering news could take the spotlight away from the glorious victory that would soon free all Europe.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin from CBS World News. A press association has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage. All we know so far is that the president died at Warm Springs in Georgia.
The news stunned the free world. In New York, the Philharmonic Orchestra canceled its concert at Carnegie Hall. The last time a cancellation took place, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. At Hitler's headquarters, Joseph Goebbels ran to the Führer with the news. "My Führer, I congratulate you. Roosevelt is dead. It is written in the stars that the second half of April will be the turning point." So said Joseph Goebbels. The newspapers in the United States published a small obituary notice in the casualty lists of the day. Under Army, Navy dead, the name Roosevelt Franklin D., Commander-in-Chief. Wife, Mrs. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt. A few days later, the free world paid its last respects to the Commander-in-Chief. Arthur Godfrey was at the microphone.
The drums are wrapped in black crepe and are muffled, as you can hear. And the pace of the musicians is so slow. And behind them, these are Navy boys. And now just coming past the Treasury, I can see the horses drawing the caisson. And most generally, folks having as tough a time as I am trying to see it. And behind us is the car bearing the man on whose shoulders now falls the terrific burdens and responsibilities that were handled so well by the man to whose body we're paying our last respects now. God bless him, President Truman. We return you now to the studio.
It is April 25th, 1945. In Germany, 75 miles south of Berlin, patrols of the 69th Division, United States 5th Corps, and elements of the Russian 58th Guards Division linked up in the city of Torgau on the river Elbe. Prime Minister Churchill speaks in the House of Commons.
After long journeys, toils, and victories across the lands and oceans, across so many deadly battlefields, the armies of the great Allies have traversed Germany and have joined hands together.
It is April 28th, 1945. Benito Mussolini is executed by Italian partisans. 2 days later, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun commit suicide at the Chancellery in Berlin. The same day, the Russians reach the German capital. They raise their flag over the Reichstag. It is May 1st, 1945. Berlin has fallen. The following day, the German armies in Italy surrender. The world awaits now the momentous news. May 3rd, May 4th, May 5th, May 6th. There are rumors, but no official word. It is May 7th.
The National Broadcasting Company delays the start of all its programs to bring you a special bulletin. It was announced in San Francisco half an hour ago by a high American official not identified as saying that Germany has surrendered unconditionally to the Allies, no strings attached.
In London, the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
The Allied force, which invaded Europe on June 6, 1944, has, with his great Russian allies and forces advancing from the south, utterly defeated the Germans by land, sea, and air.
King George VI of Great Britain.
And let us turn our thoughts on this day of triumph and proud sorrow, and then take up our work again resolved as a people to do nothing unworthy of those who died for us, and to make the world such a world as they would have desired for their children and for ours.
All that is great and traditional in the kingdom whose dominions extend beyond the seas is found in the symbol of their king, George VI. The city of London greets the royal family.
They're shouting, "We want the king, we want the king." They're surging forward, hoping to see him at any moment on the royal balcony. And here they come. First Her Majesty the Queen, it comes into view. Then the king in the uniform of an admiral of the fleet. The two princesses standing on the balcony. Listen to the crowd.
The British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
We must now devote all our strength and resources to the completion of our task, both at home and abroad. Advance, Britannia! Long live the cause of freedom! God save the King!
An eyewitness account of the surrender ceremony.
Hello, BBC. This is Thomas Cadet reporting from Supreme Headquarters. Yes, I saw it. In the small hours of this morning, May the 7th, 1945, I saw the formal acknowledgement by Germany's present leaders, military leaders of their country's complete and utter defeat by land, in the air and at sea. At exactly 2:39 a.m., the Germans entered the room amid a complete silence that was very soon broken by the activities of the photographers. General Jodl came first, an elderly, slightly bald man of medium height with a thin, red-tipped nose and protruding ears, but with some dignity of bearing. He was wearing a field-grey tunic with gold epaulets, riding breeches of the same color, with a vivid red stripe down the side, and riding boots. Admiral Friedeburg followed in sober navy blue, and then Oxenius, the aide-de-camp, brought up the rear. We advanced to the table where they were met standing by the Allied delegates, whose chief, General Beadle-Smith, then invited them to be seated with a gesture that showed neither warmth nor incorrection. In fact, the American's face remained like a mask throughout. And then came the signatures, both the two principal delegates on either side using fountain pens provided by General Eisenhower. They were streamlined, gold-capped affairs in the modern American style. And the German party then left the room. They were immediately taken to another room where General Eisenhower himself and his deputy, Air Chief Marshal Tedder, were awaiting them. The interview was brief. No salutes, only a formal bow from either side. "Have you understood the terms?" said Eisenhower. "Yes," said Jodl. "Will you carry them out?" Again the answer was yes. And that was that. The Germans were in the room for exactly 2 minutes.
The war in the Pacific is still on. The Marines who landed on Okinawa on April 1st were now securing the island. The report did not come from an American source.
Radio Tokyo admits the battle for Okinawa is virtually over and warns the Japanese people that invasion of the home islands is imminent.
Spring and summer came and went. The fighting in Okinawa went on. The bombing of Tokyo and Nagoya was almost a daily occurrence. By the end of July 1945, nearly 100 Japanese cities had felt the power of the American B-29s. Only 4 major cities were unhit: Kyoto, Sapporo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. It is August 6th, 1945. On Tinian, in the Marianas, a B-29 makes ready to take off. It is called the Enola Gay. Piloting the Enola Gay is Colonel Paul Tibbets. He is a man of many firsts. He piloted the first bomber to cross the English Channel and bomb occupied France. He led the first formation to bomb North Africa. He would now have another first. He would be the first man that would pilot a plane that would revolutionize modern warfare. In his plane is the first atomic bomb. Destination, Hiroshima.
We are delaying the start of our scheduled program to bring you the latest direct report on the atomic bomb attack on Japan. CBS World News takes you now to Guam. Webley Edwards reporting.
The men who have applied the greatest weapon ever developed, the atomic bomb, are close-mouthed, serious, and highly impressed with the world-shaking magnitude of what they've done. We talked with Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, Jr. of Miami, Florida, pilot of the B-29 that dropped the first atomic bomb in history. You asked him how he'd felt about it, and he said he didn't feel anything much, but you knew from talking to him that he sensed the meaning of that bomb's away. The explosion was a big ball of fire. Anyone not having dark glasses would have received a visual shock several miles away. One of the crew members said, "My God," when he saw what had happened. What had been Hiroshima was a white mountain of smoke, and when we saw it first, it was already up to 25,000 feet. About 1,000 feet off the ground, it looked like boiling dust. It extended over most of the city, churning down there, and the center of the impact was in the center of the city, and the boiling continued several minutes as we watched. Then the mushroom of smoke broke off, and another developed below it. This one bomb is the equivalent of a 2,000 B-29 raid. This is Webley Edwards at Guam. I return you to New York.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
2 days later, the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan.
British Prime Minister Attlee, a few minutes ago, issued a statement welcoming Russia's entry into the war. The declaration of war made today by Russia against Japan is a proof of a solidarity that exists between the principal allies and should shorten the struggle and establish conditions which will allow general peace to come about. We welcome this great decision of Soviet Russia. Now, that was what was said today by Prime Minister Attlee. We take you now to London. Edward R. Murrow reporting.
This is London. As you just heard, Mr. Attlee has welcomed Russia's entry into the war. The announcement has caused very little excitement here in London. Russia becomes the first nation to enter the Pacific War without being attacked. It is presumed here that she has done so for reasons which have traditionally caused nations to declare war: the defense or furtherance of her national interests. But the best opinion here seems to be that Russia would not have entered the war at this stage had she not had reason to believe that the war in the East was nearing its end. There is no disposition here to discount the weight of Russian military strength and a growing appreciation of what is called the realism of Russian policy, an acknowledgement that Russia has immediate and long-range interests in China. This declaration of war will be regarded as a move to protect, ensure, and perhaps expand them. For the past few weeks, the Russians have had the diplomatic initiative in dealing with China. In the pubs, there were a few toasts drunk to good old Uncle Joe, and people sort of vaguely realized that already this week, humans had demonstrated that they have the power to destroy humanity, and the whole pattern of power in Asia is changing.
The next day, the Japanese city of Nagasaki received an atom bomb. An ironic note, the bomb used in the attack against Nagasaki had been so improved that the bomb used against Hiroshima was already obsolete. After Hiroshima, the Japanese High Command had ignored an ultimatum to surrender. Now, every day that went by could mean the obliteration of another city and hundreds of thousands of deaths and permanent injuries. August 10th. August 11th. Rumors. No further atomic attacks. No unconditional surrender. August 12th.
This is Bob Trout in Columbia's newsroom in New York. We have a flash on the United Press wire. President Truman has just announced that Japan has accepted the surrender terms of the Allies. The time on the end of the flash is 9:33 p.m. Eastern Wartime. 9:33 p.m. Eastern Wartime for that historic flash, which signifies the end of the Second World War, although, of course, I must caution you, not the official end. Another flash is coming in on the normal United Press wire now. Listen. Now, that is a flash, and this is exactly what it says. This is the regular United Press machine. It says flash. Editors, hold up that flash. Listen how quiet it is in our newsroom. I wonder if you can appreciate the contrast. Not a machine is working. They're all ominously quiet. They're waiting for further details.
The flash was premature. August 13th. Still no atomic attack. Still no official surrender. It is August 14th.
NBC has interrupted this program to bring you a special bulletin from the Associated Press. Washington. Secretary of the Navy Forrestal left a conference with President Truman this morning to say that he hopes the surrender of Japan is an actuality and that he fully expects a development in that respect within 25 or 30 minutes. I shall repeat that. Secretary Forrestal, Secretary of the Navy Forrestal, left a conference with President Truman this morning to say that he hopes the surrender of Japan is an actuality and that he fully expects a development in that respect within 25 or 30 minutes.
Throughout the day, reports came from all over the world. It is now 7 p.m. in New York, August 14th, 1945.
Columbia's news headquarters in New York, Bob Trout speaking. This is the supreme hour, 7 o'clock Eastern Wartime. The correspondents at the White House have entered President Truman's office. The Prime Minister of Great Britain is about to begin his broadcast. The Japanese have accepted our terms fully. That is the word we have just received from the White House in Washington, and I didn't expect to hear a celebration here in our newsroom in New York, but you can hear one going on behind me. The Japanese have accepted fully the surrender terms of the United Nations. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the Second World War. It is not, of course, the official VJ Day, but the United Nations on land, on sea, on air, to the four corners of the earth and the seven seas, are united and are victorious.
At precisely the same moment that President Truman was holding his press conference, Prime Minister Clement Attlee was speaking to the British Empire.
Japan has today surrendered. The last of our enemies is laid low. Peace has once again come to the world. Let us thank God for this great deliverance and his mercies. Long live the King.
It is Sunday, September 2nd, 1945. 3 years, 8 months, 25 days since the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The place, Tokyo Bay, aboard the battleship Missouri. The situation, the signing of the surrender terms by the Japanese. From the foremast of the Missouri flew the same flag that had flown over the Capitol in Washington on December 7th, 1941. 9 members of the Japanese delegation were on board the Missouri, 3 in formal attire with top hats, 6 in military uniform. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Allied Commander, Pacific Theater, opened the ceremonies.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. The issues involving divergent ideals and ideologies have been determined on the battlefields of the world, and hence are not for our discussion or debate. It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.
Now, a dramatic moment. 2 gaunt heroes of early Allied defeats. Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright, defender of Bataan and Corregidor, and Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, the British commander at Singapore.
Will General Wainwright and General Percival step forward and accompany me while I sign? Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always.
The war is over. If there is an epitaph for those who died and a prologue for those not yet born, it was spoken on July 16th, 1945, when the first atom bomb was exploded on a New Mexico desert. Describing the scene, one observer said, "The blast was followed almost immediately by the strong, sustained, almost awesome roar which warned of doomsday and made us feel that perhaps we puny things were blasphemous to dare tamper with the forces heretofore reserved to the Almighty God."
These proceedings are closed.